Hello and welcome. Today we have the wonderful Capucine Cogné with us, who's a marketing consultant in the FemTech and Wellness industries. Her recent work focuses on our menstrual cycle. And during the 4 years Capucine lived and worked in China, she co-founded two women's networks as well. And yeah, currently she continues to work with female empowerment NGOs, particularly Nouvelle Ere, who are fighting period poverty in Morocco. So firstly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And yeah, it's so great to have you on. I'm super interested to have this kind of chat today. And I guess, yeah, as I normally start off the podcast, I'd love to hear a bit more about yourself, how you got into this industry, and a little bit about you would be great.
Yeah, of course. So as you just said, I'm Capucine. I'm a marketing consultant focused on the femtech industry. And recently, as you mentioned, I've been focusing particularly on our menstrual cycles. We released a guide in collaboration with the Instagram influencer Tara Margulies about our menstrual cycle. And the idea is making all this information more accessible to women because we lack education, discussion, etc. in the space. So that's a big thing that I'm working towards. And as you mentioned, I also work on that with Nouvelle Ere in Morocco. So Nouvelle Ere is a period poverty NGO, and we are trying to make sustainable period products more accessible and also education about menstrual health. What's amazing is that education about menstrual health often leads to education about sexual health, because as soon as you start menstrual health discussion, that leads into the other. And so it benefits women all around and is very necessary.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I guess maybe perhaps starting with the menstrual guide that you mentioned. So what kind of things do you include in that? What kind of things do you feel like women are missing in their menstrual education that they have at the moment?
So our menstrual guide, first and foremost, is showing us that menstrual cycles are positive, not just periods have such negative connotations in most societies, to be honest, of the world today. And this leads to shame, guilt, and the wish to not speak about our menstrual health, which is a massive issue. So a big thing that we've done in the menstrual guide is show that our bodies are really incredible. Like there are statistics showing that our brains change throughout our menstrual cycle and awesome things like that, or that the plasma of our periods can have healing qualities on scars, etc. Like these really mind-blowing things that no one really speaks about, because what we learn at school is this is one of the ways that you get pregnant, or the very biological aspect of it. So the menstrual guide is really to highlight the positive elements as well as the negative elements, obviously. The negative elements often being to do with illnesses around the menstrual cycle, and then also talking about the menstrual cycle being more than the period, because so often we equate menstrual, the word menstrual, to periods. And I mean, periods are uncomfortable, but we can't really hide it. And so explaining how that cycle impacts women, not just during your period, but the 4 phases of it. And then we dive deep into period products and contraceptives, because so often we're given a tampon on our first period, or this is what happened to me, on our first period, and then you use tampons for 10 years because you never really thought that there might be something else. And same with contraception. Often people are given the pill and then they don't really see that there are other options out there. So making sure that women know that there are options for them to feel comfortable and them to have great periods, basically.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think, do you kind of also expand that education to, say watch out for, what's not normal in a period? Because obviously when we don't have this discussion about it, yeah, it's really important to kind of know what the red flags are if something's not
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah, so we have a whole section which is sort of menstrual cycle related issues.
Yeah.
It's a guide about the menstrual cycle and these issues. We're not specialists on these issues, so we basically touch on them and give further resources for anyone who thinks they're experiencing them.
Yeah. So is your focus more on the stigma around periods? Yeah.
Our focus is more on the phases. So the different phases of your menstrual cycle and how they impact your daily life. That's the primary bit.
Okay, cool.
And we broaden that into everything else, basically.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear a bit more about the work that you do on each of the phases. So yeah, what kind of things do you point out?
So we've got 4 phases. A lot of people don't know this. Well, 2 main ones, and then within those 2. And our 4 phases are the menstrual phase, so when you have your period, the follicular phase, which is, so I like to compare them to our seasons. So follicular is our spring, which you can kind of see what it means. It's when we're ready to try new things. We're feeling a bit more energized, etc. And then ovulation, which is our summer. And it's when women, obviously this changes from woman to woman, but generally speaking, it's when women feel at their best, they're most confident. And then luteal is our autumn, so before menstrual, and it's sort of when you're dialing back, starting to feel a bit more tired, you need more calories, you need more sleep. And so with every phase, it impacts your immune system, your sleep, your work, your sex drive, literally everything, because hormones. And so, I mean, I'll give an example. I have started tailoring my work around my phases. And so, for instance, in my summer, when I feel most confident, I plan all of my marketing. So I have a big LinkedIn presence, for instance. All of those posts are scheduled in that phase because that is the energy that I want to bring to social media. And then in the luteal phase, so that's the autumn, we're much better at reviewing and editing. And so, for instance, as a copywriter or content writer, when I have an article planned, I will try. Obviously, sometimes it's not possible. And also, I mean, I do want to highlight, we can do anything in every phase, but we are just, thanks to our hormones, we are more prone to lean towards a certain thing in the different phases. And so in the luteal phase, that's editing or reviewing work and like taking a step back. So that's like an example for you.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think that kind of takes me on to my next question, because obviously you give this information about what happens and you're in each stage, but I was wondering whether you give specific advice as to, so I know at Screamy we kind of do stuff on exercises for different stages of the menstrual cycle, or what to eat at different stages. So I wonder if you include that as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. And what kind of who are you kind of aiming your guide at? So how are you trying to get this guide in? Is it through schools? Is it through different avenues?
It's a website.
Okay.
So it's purely digital, and Tara's, I don't know how many followers she has, but Tara is a Instagram influencer, and her target audience, so she speaks a lot about feminism, menstrual and sexual health, and well-being, etc. And so her main audience are women between 20 and 40 usually. And that's our target audience.
Okay, cool. And then how do you kind of move that up? So you mentioned it kind of often moves on to sexual health, and that, how do you kind of navigate that field? Because obviously it's such a large field, and also I don't know how specialized you are in the area or what kind of parts you tend to focus on. So I guess, how do you kind of navigate that?
So I think the cycle is very specifically menstrual cycle. When I mention that, it's very specifically, so when Nouvelle Ere, the period poverty NGO that I volunteer for, when we hold sort of education sessions. And so we invite gynecologists and specialists in the field. We're not pretending to be specialists in the field. And we often invite women because there's a real stigma in Morocco. As soon as a man's in the room, it's really, really hard to speak about these things, which is a shame because men need to be educated on this too. However, step by step, right? So essentially we have specialists in the room and we start by speaking about menstrual health, and then there are questions, and the questions is what often leads to
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I guess I'd love to hear a bit more about your work on period poverty and how the scope of the issue and what you're kind of doing to combat it, and everything about it.
Yeah, so period poverty is a massive issue and one that I'm very passionate about. Very, very passionate about. It's a massive issue. It impacts, according to the World Bank, it impacts 500 million women and girls across the globe. That is in the UK just as much as in other countries. In Africa, it's particularly prevalent, and there are estimates that 1 in 10 African girls miss school because of period poverty.
Yeah, so for the listeners, sorry, what would you define period poverty as?
Okay, period poverty is, there are different definitions, but here for these statistics, it's the lack of access to basic menstrual products or hygienic bathrooms to be able to change your products and deal with your period, basically. And so I first started being aware of period poverty quite late. I was fundraising for a marathon, and the previous time I had fundraised, the charity was corrupt. And so I was really, it was a disabilities charity, so not period poverty. And I was really passionate about finding a charity to fundraise for that I knew the people and knew for sure that the money that I was fundraising was being used well. And one of my close friends had founded an organization called Sanitary Aid Nigeria, which is an amazing charity that helps provide education around menstruation and sustainable menstrual products to women and girls in Nigeria. And it sort of planted a seed in me that kept growing. And now that I came back to Morocco recently, I grew up here. I was very intent on finding an NGO to work for, and particularly a period poverty NGO, because I really believe that this issue covers so many different issues within it. It impacts gender equality, because when women don't have access to menstrual products on their periods, they don't go to school and they don't go to work, leading to a gender imbalance. It impacts poverty generally, of course. It impacts the climate change and the environment, because if women are using unsustainable products such as non-reusable tampons and pads, which are, a lot of them have like between 70 and 90% plastic in them, then that impacts climate change. And so for me, this issue just encompasses so many things that are important to me.
Yeah, no, that's super, super interesting. And so what's your kind of, I mean, I agree, it's such a huge issue. And especially with even in countries, so even in the UK as well, I know that it's an increasing issue with the cost of living crisis. I think I saw a statistic the other day that said, I think it was 1 in 8 women in the UK in the last year have struggled to buy sanitary products. And I think it's something that affects everyone, and it's just another cost on women and women's health, and that I think we need to consider. So that's really amazing, the work you're doing. So how do you work towards eradicating period poverty? What are the kind of steps you do or work that you do?
Yeah, sorry, I'm conscious that was your previous question and I went
No, don't worry.
a little offline. But I think the reason I went off topic is that some people ask me why period poverty, why not poverty generally. So I wanted to explain that. How we work towards that. So I think education is really, really key. As I mentioned with the menstrual cycle guide, it's the key to unlocking the shame and the taboo nature around menstruation, which leads to more women talking about it and more people knowing about it, both in the hygienic sense, but also in the impact that it has on our bodies. So we have we lead with the education aspect. So for example, last year, the Nouvelle Ere campaign, this was before I was volunteering for them, but we had period underwear by Libre, who is a Moroccan company that are making period underwear, and they sponsored the event. I mean the campaign, not the event. So essentially we had some to give away, and we went into villages in the Atlas Mountains, which are close to Marrakesh, with a gynecologist and with specialists in the field. And we held a session on education, and everyone left with period underwear. And the reason education is also really key is that you start with talking about menstrual health and hygiene, but then you also need to explain how to use the products, because you can't just give products and then, period underwear, if you don't wash them properly, it's super unhygienic. So talking about how to wash them given the facilities that they have. So that was last year's campaign, which was mainly around period underwear. And now this year, what we're doing is in the area of Sidi Moumen in Casablanca. Sidi Moumen is an area which has one of the highest poverty rates in Casablanca. We are collaborating with the Keltoum Foundation, where they retrain women to help them get into the workforce after tricky situations. And they've trained some women in sewing. And so we have bought a special fabric from a Nordic company called SafePad, which they will sew to create reusable pads. We have estimated 2,700 reusable pads being made. And so we'll launch that in a month's time. And so they will start making them, and 20% of those will be completely free and give in the similar way to the period underwear that we worked with before. We'll run campaigns around that. And then the 80% will be sold at really accessible prices to different where our target is companies, to encourage companies to provide these for the women, especially in factories or women workers. So that's the goal. We're still playing around with who the target audience is, but essentially selling these at really accessible prices, so that women are able to afford sustainable products. And then all of the revenue goes to the women who have sewed them in
Oh,
CD.
that's great. Yeah.
So that's the whole process.
No, I think that's great. And I think it's really interesting what you said about the companies part of it, because I think with your education, tackling the stigma and making periods more of a conversation, I think women are way more likely to speak up for their rights and demand these things off their employers. And I think that's even something that we're seeing here in the UK. I mean, employers are increasingly actually stocking periods and sanitary products in their bathrooms. I mean, we've still got a long way to go, but I think opening up the conversation as you guys are doing, even at the very local level, I think is hopefully will initiate a lot of change at a much wider level. So no, I think it's super amazing. But I guess lastly, with your period poverty work and with Nouvelle Ere, where do you see it going in the future? Is there any kind of goal that you're aiming towards this year? Where do you see the next year kind of taking you guys?
For us, the main reason that we're moving towards this model rather than the one-off campaigns is for the sustainability of it. Because if we have some sort of revenue from the sustainable period products being provided to employers, that means that we can reinvest some of it to buy more material to continue. So the idea, like really this year, is to test this model and see if we're able to continue it. And I really believe there's a demand for it, there's a need for it. So fingers crossed. But yeah, that's the main reason behind it, and our main goal is to make this sustainable, both so that the women of Sidi Moumen can be fully dedicated to this project. Right now they're so entrepreneurial, they have so many different things that they're doing, and also so that we're able to every time donate 20% completely, and the 80% as making them accessible to more women. That wasn't grammatically correct, that sentence, but I think the meaning is there.
I get what you mean. No, that's great. And would you expand beyond Morocco in the future, perhaps, or is that a later goal?
Yeah, I think for sure, if we can, yes. I think with period poverty, there are so many little organizations. So another element to think about on a more global scale is how do we make it one? How do we make it one? And I think it's the same with feminism. There are so many different types of feminism, and it's more impactful when you have one.
Although I think that it's kind of interesting that the smaller ones are quite good in the fact that each area is slightly different and has slightly different needs. So I think, the work that you're doing, you obviously is so integrated in at a local level. So I think sometimes when things get mashed into one big thing, then it's not always for the best.
It's not always, for sure. It's not always a good thing. But I think so if we were to expand, the idea would be to collaborate with local or join forces.
There's so many synergies between what you're doing in Morocco and even with over here in the UK, from my limited knowledge of the work that period poverty here. So I guess just anything to tackle that stigma anywhere is always going to be a good thing. And
exactly. And I think in the space, people, they're really supportive. Same in the FemTech space. I think there's really a common mission to help women, essentially. And so it means that NGOs, period products, etc., are very collaborative and supportive with each other, which is really lovely.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also not just women that you aim to help. I think by helping women, you end up that makes a better and healthier society as a whole. So I think it's super great.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And kind of on that, but with the collaboration aspect of things, you've obviously set up your women's network. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that and how, a bit more in general about that would be great.
So that's less on women's health. When I was living in Hong Kong, the most, I'll speak about PP Win, the most recent, bigger one. One of my closest colleagues and friends, Siri, and I co-founded a cross-industry women's network. which was location based in Pacific Place, which is an area in Hong Kong with a lot of office buildings, a lot of banks, but different industries. And so what we did, it was a network, and we had both women and men involved, which was, it was across different companies, across different industries. And it was a platform to share what companies were doing for gender equality. That was the main purpose. It led to a lot of different events and different things, but that was the founding purpose, because what often tends to happen is that companies go internal and think about what they can do to improve gender equality, and they look at other players in the industry, in their own industry, because it's a very natural competitor and like comparison point. However, there is so much to learn from very different industries, and the women in finance will have a very different experience than women in a real estate company, which is where I was working. So it was fascinating, and I think it really helped foster a community around this purpose, and foster conversations about what types of policies are most effective. And the reality is that within companies, you have to prioritize certain policies over others. You can't suddenly have them all at once, unfortunately. So how do you navigate parental leave? How do you navigate contraceptive health or menstrual health within companies? Those are all topics we discussed. And then slowly but steadily, we built it out, and it became also educational. So a big example, we sort of used knowledge from different companies, such as, for instance, the finance industry, with the example that I'm about to make, to help each other. So, for example, there's a massive investment gap. There's not just a gender pay gap, but a gender investment gap. So men tend to invest more than women, which leads to them having more wealth. And so we held a workshop about investing your money and finance in general, which is really an area which women, society has told us from young, a lot of us, that we don't need to take care of finance, and like money is almost rude to be spoken about. But that, as we grow up, that really becomes a barrier for us. So that was one of the things, but we hosted many different events. Wow,
that sounds amazing. That sounds, super empowering. And I guess, what are your plans for the future with it? Or is it just still as a continued space of kind of sharing different policies and different workshops? Like, where do you see it moving?
So I've since left Hong Kong, so it's been quite hard to navigate that. But when I was in Chengdu, I was helping from afar. And so it was linked to another location-based cross-industry network called Taiku Win. It's Women's Inspiration Network. And the hope was to build it throughout different locations in Hong Kong. What's really tough, and what we've encountered with Pacific Place Women's Network, is people move. And so you have these sponsors within companies and they go away. Just like I did, for example. I moved, and although, because I was particularly invested, just like my co-founder is, because we're founding members, it's really hard to continue. So right now we have like a group on LinkedIn that we keep active, and we collaborate with the other location-based women's network on certain events. But it's really hard to keep these going because you really need motivated people to sort of lead the charge. And so that's hard. And to be honest, I think in multiple women's networks that I've been part of or have founded, that has been an ongoing issue. how to motivate and convince people that this is worthy of your extra time as a co-curricular activity. And the reality is most of we had some wonderful men involved, but most of the people there were women. And so women who have kids, who already have like so many responsibilities, men too, but women in particular are juggling so many things, and add on, okay, now can you help be the link between this society and your company? Organizations and your company. And so that's hard. And I think it's the reality with a lot of co-curricular extra quote unquote activities.
Yeah, and definitely I think there's a lot of people passionate about it, but it's sometimes hard for that to translate, as you say, into actually doing something when it's something another thing to add on to the pile of things to do. So it's definitely very hard. Do you see any way of kind of trying to make that more accessible, or is that something you're still working on?
I mean, we've thought a lot about it, making it more accessible. I think the biggest issue or like struggle is, and I think this is with everything in life, is getting someone to prioritize it over, I don't know, the million other things that come up on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm just thinking. And so I think that is the fundamental. And so I think to create organizations or networks that really stand the long term. From the start, there needs to be a foundation, getting people's complete buy-in, and sort of making sure that everyone, because as you said, people are motivated, but motivation, turning motivation to action is a different thing. And I think the fundamental is how to get people to prioritize it, and then afterwards it's putting systems in place. We had systems, so I think the issue is really the former, and Hong Kong is a place with lots of movement. A lot. You have a lot of expats coming in and out, particularly with COVID. So I mean, those are my reflections on it. I think there are some things we would have done differently, but I do think we did most of what was in our capacity to do.
No, that's really great, I think. And I think, the work you did around education is also super great, because I guess it kind of, when the education is out there, people then know what to do and they can do that in their own time. So I think that's also a pathway forward, is making that education and knowledge accessible, like you did, by sharing these policies that women wouldn't themselves, or women or men wouldn't themselves, have time to look up in between like different companies. So I think making that accessible is definitely a way forward, so that people can then have the knowledge and then decide what to do with that as they wish, and that's completely their decision. But I think that's great. But I guess that's all of my questions, and thank you so much for coming on. And I guess, is there anything else that you want to say before we close up?
I'm trying to think. I don't think so in particular. Thank you so much for all your questions. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, it's been so lovely to have you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye, Jess.